Hey, people. So I've been thinking about the videos that I've been making recently. To name a few, the Bulls video, the Chicago Bulls video, and the Indiana Pacers video, kind of talking about these teams that are um, middling. Probably isn't correct because they're a little better than middling, but those teams that are just below the creme de la creme of the East as we're heading into next season. We're talking about where they will be seated within this middle of the pack, right? We're talking about the Bulls, for example, in the context of they probably not. They could be a 3 seed, but they could also be as low as an 8 seed. They're somewhere in that 4 to 6, 4 to 8, 3 to 8 range, right? And I think the same thing can be said about the Indiana Pacers. I was starting to do some research on some more teams that might be in this same hemisphere as those teams, but I fell down this rabbit hole of looking into how important is it to kind of be those top seeds. Does it matter? Does it matter if you're a 3 seed versus an 8 seed, as far as in the context of ultimately the goal here for every team is to win a championship, right? So how important is it to be in that upper echelon if you have championship aspirations? Well, I did the research. Since 1950, only 8 teams that were not a top 3 seed have made it to the finals. Out of those 8 teams that have made it to the finals, only 2 have won championships. Those 2 teams are the 1969 Celtics, which that team had a couple of good things going for it. Primarily, it was a completely different era of basketball. I mean, for one, Bill Russell was the best player on the team and also the head coach, so that's something we don't see anymore. But also, they were a 4th seed and they were one of 14 teams, so that kind of helps your odds in and of itself, right? Not to mention, they won the title the year before. So this isn't a team that it's not new to them, right? They were the number one defense in the league. They had Bill Russell, they had Havlicek, they had Sam Jones. This was a very good and complete basketball team that just kind of had a rocky. They experienced some turbulence in winning this title in 1969. Now, the other team that won a title was the 1994-95 Houston Rockets. There's a couple similarities between them and the 69 Celtics. The primary one is that they had both won a championship the year before. So these are not teams that are showing up to the finals, oh, we're a low seed, and they just happen to find their way to a title. They had experienced it the year before. There's also some things that make sense about why this was a team that won the title the year before, started out the season red hot, but then they kind of, hit this rocky patch in the middle of the year. What they end up doing is they make a trade to bring on Clyde Drexler, which kind of gave them some renewed energy, some renewed vigor, even though some people on the team weren't super happy about it. And also Hakeem Olajuwon, who you might have heard of him before, he was injured this season. So not only are they a team that had already overcome the mountain, and now they're trying to repeat, and they're getting every team's best shot, as we know that happens. If you're the team that wins it the year before, every team's going to circle that on the calendar as an important game. Olajuwon gets injured. They make a big trade for Clyde Drexler. So coming into the playoffs, this team is a 6 seed. So obviously not where you want to be. But this team goes through the gauntlet to make it to and win this finals. They beat a Stockton Malone Jazz team that was one of 260-win teams in the season. Then right after that, they beat Barkley and the Suns, who they'd beaten the year before in the playoffs as well. Then they go and beat David Robinson and the Spurs in the Western Conference Finals. And then in the finals, they swept the Orlando Magic, who had just beaten Jordan and the Bulls to get to the finals. So very much an outlier in a lot of ways. On paper, it's a 6 seed. You wouldn't think that they were that good, but there was a ton of factors that attributed to them being a 6 seed and still winning a title and it making sense. But with that being said, as the data shows, this is incredibly rare and hasn't happened since. The 6 other teams outside of the 69 Celtics and the 95 Rockets, who weren't a top 3 seed and still made it to the finals, they all lost. We're talking 1978 Sonics, 1981 Rockets, 99 Knicks, 2006 Dallas Mavericks, 2010 Celtics, 2018 Cavaliers, and then we just had the Miami Heat in 2020. They were a 5th seed. So what should we take from this data? Um, First off, I think obviously there's exceptions to every rule, right? We've seen it time and time again. Obviously, the higher your seed is, the more likely you are to win a championship. If you go back and look at, I just referenced the Wikipedia page for the NBA Finals in preparation for this video. It really helps if you're a number one seed because basically I don't know if there's, I'm sure there has been that I'm forgetting, but basically every finals ever has at least one, if not two, one seeds in the championship. But even past that, if you're not the one seed, it really behooves you to be an even higher seed. We've only had one team ever who was an A seed make the finals. That was the 99 Knicks, but they did not win a title. And then five of these eight teams are four seeds. So obviously, the higher you are, the better chance that you have to win a title. I don't think that that is a revolutionary fact to anyone. Of course, the better you are during the regular season, the better you probably are in the playoffs. But heading into next season, what should we be taking from looking over this? Well, I think it's really important to go through and say which of these teams have an actual chance to be in the running here. And this is also kind of difficult because we've seen over the course of the last couple of years, teams really start to put less and less emphasis on the regular season. This is attributed to a couple of factors, but historically, we've always seen teams try as hard as they can to have a great regular season and kind of use that to segue into their playoffs push. You have home court advantage, and also player empowerment has kind of led to a lot of players who are getting older, players who are coming off of injuries, players who, for whatever reasons, are spending less and less time focusing on the regular season and kind of preparing themselves to be in their peak of powers going into the playoffs. So that kind of functionality of what the regular season means is something that really is we've only seen in the NBA as far as the big major sports. I know the most about the NBA, so I could be missing some prevalent examples from other sports. But as far as I'm aware of, this seems to be something that the NBA is spawning, especially recently. And we kind of saw this eclipse with the 15-16 Warriors team, the 73-9 team. That was kind of the peak of the regular season being super important. And they went on to not win the championship that year. And it seemed like we saw teams kind of have this internal dialogue of like, what the hell is even the purpose of having an incredible regular season if you're just going to sputter and not reach the mountaintop in the playoffs. So we've seen this with Kawhi kind of taking off regular seasons. We're certainly going to be seeing it with him this year. But players like LeBron as well, who are putting less and less emphasis on the regular season, that kind of comes into play here as well. So the logical question to ask is, knowing what we know about how important it is to be a really high seed heading into the playoffs, where are we ranking teams? And again, this is a fun exercise, but it's impossible to do, right? There's always a team that's going to come out and surprise you with their record. And of course, we can't see the future, but if we had to put some hypothetical money on what teams we think are going to be in a spot to secure one of these top spots, therefore giving them the best chance to win a finals, who are those teams? I think the West, for the first time in a long time, is actually an easier exercise for this than it is for the East. But I want to cover the East first, just because I have a Eastern Conference team, and also I've been doing videos about the Eastern Conference, so it's more front of mind. So starting at the top, and this might be a team that is a team that's doing the last point I was talking about, which is putting less and less emphasis on the regular season in preparation for the playoffs. The Brooklyn Nets, they have to be, if not the Bucks, they have to be everyone's choice for the most likely one seed in the Eastern Conference, I would assume. I can hear arguments for other teams. I see some pretty valid arguments for the Bucks. Some of these other teams taking a step that we're not seeing. But I think on paper right now, it's pretty fair to say that the Brooklyn Nets will probably be the number one seed in the Eastern Conference. So we'll pencil them in. I'm probably going to pin or Sharpie them in to the one seed, but for argument's sake, we'll say that they're going to be one of those teams up there. And then if not the Nets, the Bucks. For me, this is my list. If your list is different, please put them in the comments. I'm going to respond to all the comments. I would love to have a conversation about what some teams could be that are up in this top tier of the Eastern Conference. But It's got to be the Nets. It's got to be the Bucks. And then it's kind of take your pick, right, of who is going to be this third or this fourth seed. I made an argument in my videos for the Chicago Bulls being one of those 3 or 4 seeds. I made an argument for the Pacers. I also think there's incredibly valid arguments for the Sixers, depending on what their team kind of looks like. But I mean, Joel Embiid in and of himself is probably a 3 or 4 seed. Obviously, the Miami Heat are making big moves to try and make a push to be in that top tier. And there's really good arguments to be made for the Atlanta Hawks. There's a good argument to be made for the New York Knicks. I wouldn't be completely opposed to an argument for the Toronto Raptors being one of those seeds, depending on what their team looks like. And then there's these teams that are kind of just under the cusp, but again, people can always surprise us. Would I fall out of my chair if the Washington Wizards had some miraculous season? I mean, if you look at their roster, they have so much talent. Am I betting on it? I'm betting $0 on it, but it's a possibility, right? My whole point in saying this, to digress, is that all of these teams are vying for these Eastern Conference positions that are incredibly important to secure if you have championship aspirations. Only so many teams can be in those 4 spots. It's actually exactly 4 based on my math. But if you're going to twist my arm, I'm going to say going into the season, I'm going to take top 4 seeds. I'm going to take Brooklyn Nets. I'm going to take Milwaukee Bucks. I feel really confident that the Miami Heat will probably be one of those seeds. I don't see how you make that move. You have the team that you have, and you're not one of those seeds. And then Bulls, Sixers, Celtics, really, it's a toss up. Even though I'm a Bulls fan, I don't know if I feel super comfortable. I'll say that the Bulls are going to be the 4th seed. So those are my 4. And even the Bulls, that's not a spot that you want to beat, right? The data shows that you have to be a top seed if you want to have a really good mathematical chance of making the finals and certainly winning the finals. And now the West, man, I said that this was easier than the East, but I might be biting my tongue on that a little bit. I might have to take that back because there's a lot of teams here too. But I think up top it's tough to not say the Lakers, even though it's a very hodgepodge roster that they've kind of thrown together. It looks really, really good on paper. That team's going to be super driven to be proving themselves. I don't see how the Lakers aren't certainly a top 3 seed. I mean, I don't see, barring some crazy injury or two, I don't see how they're not at least a top 3 seed. So they have a good mathematical chance to make it to the finals. And then there's really good arguments for a lot of teams. I mean, if you want to say the Warriors, by all means. It's tough for me to consider them as a playoff, or as a lot of people are saying that they're probably a finals, if not favorite, one of the top teams that we expect to see in the finals. That's tough for me to get there. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but it's more of a stretch for me than it seems like it is for most people. The Utah Jazz, they were really good last season and then they fizzled, but there was injuries there and I get that. So I might have the Jazz in my top 3 as well. The Phoenix Suns, phenomenal argument to be made for the Phoenix Suns. Luckily, some teams that we usually expect to see in this top tier are probably not going to be there. I'm talking about Los Angeles Clippers. Tough road to be a top seed. You're not going to have Kawhi for almost all of the season. Even once he comes back, he's probably going to be resting a lot during the regular season, saving it for the playoffs. So I think the Clippers are probably out of consideration for top 3. I think the Nuggets are probably out of consideration for top 3. And if they're in the top 3, I won't be surprised. I just think the Jamal Murray thing is difficult to come back from. We're going to see him at some point during the season, but he's going to have to be working back right to get to his game. So that'll be tough for them. I wouldn't be opposed if you said the Dallas Mavericks. I wouldn't be opposed if you said the Trailblazers, although both of those teams, it's kind of tough, but certainly less options than the East. I'm not saying that the West isn't as good or better than the East. I'm just saying the East has a lot of teams that are like all have some issues and all have like aspirations to be good in the postseason. But yeah, just summarizing all of my points, I'm probably going to take Lakers, Jazz, Suns from the Western Conference just because I'm boring, and that's probably who most people are going to choose as their top 3 seeds. So out of the 30 teams that we have in the NBA, and also based on my assumptions, which could be totally wrong, my assumptions on who are the most likely top three seeds, the six teams with the best chance to win a title this year, mathematically, would be Utah Jazz, Phoenix Suns, Los Angeles Lakers, Brooklyn Nets, Milwaukee Bucks, Miami Heat. And again, we're going into the 75th year of the NBA, and a couple of those are merger years, but well, a couple of those years are before the merger, but 75 years, we've only had 8 instances of teams that were not top 3 make it to the finals. Only 2 of those instances led to a title. I mean, your chances of getting to, but ultimately winning a title, if you're not one of those 3 seeds, is so slim. So if you're in a position and you're not one of those top 3 seeds, let's say that you're a huge fan of, oh, I don't know. Let's just go ahead and say, let's say you're a huge fan of the Wizards. Huge fan of the Wizards. There's not a lot of you guys, so good for you for being a Wizards fan. But let's say you're a Wizards fan. And just as a quick aside, I think that you guys are going to be very interesting next season for the 3 Wizards fans who are watching this. That's not a diss at how many Wizards fans there are. That's a diss at how many people watch my videos right now. If you are watching my videos, thanks so much. But let's say you're a Wizards fan and you're going into the season and you're hearing me give all these statistics and you say, but Alex, our Wizards probably won't be a 3 seed this season. Should I not watch the Wizards this season and be uninterested because they don't have a chance to win a title? Well, Wizards fan, I would say that it's very bold of you to think that you have a chance to win a title this year. But also, I would say the numbers show that it's a lot more common to make it to a finals if you're not a 3 seed as the years go on, right? We see the first time this happens is 69, and then we go 78, 81. But then if you look at the recent examples, and again, this is like the numbers aren't awesome, but 95, 99, and then 06, 10, 18, 20. It's becoming more and more likely for your team to not be a top 3 seed and make it to the finals than it is in years past. Now, that's not awesome. I don't think that you hear that and you're like, you know what? Now I've completely reinstilled my confidence in my team. Maybe there's not a great thing to hang your hat on if you aren't going to be one of those top 3 seeds. I think the argument is a little bit better if you're going to be a top 4 seed, but the math really shows that 3-4, the margin is really, really big to make it to the finals. I would say this. I would say if your team is probably not going to be a top 3 seed, there is several things to point to that should make you feel a little bit better going into the season about your chances. First and foremost, it's the fact that teams are spending far less time and energy on the regular season as the seasons go on. We're seeing teams primarily driven by individual players who are kind of taking it easy during the regular season, saving themselves for the playoffs. So the fact that teams are putting less emphasis year over year on the regular season means that more and more teams have the chance to go far in the playoffs, right? I would also say that these are really weird seasons. You know, we saw the bubble Heat make it to the finals, and I think part of that might have been due to the fact that it was a bubble, but also starting with that season and then last season there was that quick off season, and then this season, in order for us to kind of get back on the standard track of NBA years, we're having a shortened off season this off season as well. So there is a lot more volatility in what the regular season is going to look like with these teams. We're dealing with factors that we've never had to deal with in the NBA before. So maybe this data set that we're looking at, even though it's super, super big for, you know, the history of the league, maybe it's not totally accurate because we've never had to deal with a pandemic before in the NBA, at least one of this scale, and especially in the way that we're dealing with it. So there's a lot of factors that are affecting teams in the NBA this year that kind of messes with what we could be seeing that we haven't seen before. Even further emphasis on the way that the game is changing, right? These teams from the past, 3-pointers weren't even a thing for some of these teams. So my point is that even though the data doesn't look great, that doesn't mean that this is set in stone, right? We even see this with the NCAA tournament, for example, as just like something offhand. we never thought that it would be something where we see 1 seeds get beat by 16 seeds. It's always the top seeds that make it, but there is always a chance for records to be broken, for history to be adjusted. So back to you, Wizards fan that I was talking with earlier. Uh, while it's unlikely that your team is going to be a top 4 seed and therefore pretty darn unlikely that you're going to win a championship this year, chin up, because you could prove everyone wrong and be the first.